The desert night was quiet except for the sound of wind brushing against dry grass. Samuel, a man in his early 40s with strong hands and sunburnt skin, walked slowly across his farmland. He had lived alone on this land for many years, raising crops and animals with steady patience. Life near the New Mexico frontier was never easy, but Samuel was proud of what he had built with his own hands. Every evening after finishing his work, he liked to check his vegetable garden before going to bed. It was his way of making sure everything was safe from animals or thieves. That night, as he approached the garden, something felt strange. The wooden gate was not closed properly, and the soil looked disturbed. His heart skipped a beat. Samuel leaned forward, squinting in the pale light of the moon, and saw a figure crouching among the cornstalks. At first he thought it might be a coyote or some other wild creature, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized it was a person, a human form, small and thin, moving quickly between the plants. Samuel's hand tightened around the wooden stick he carried. He had heard of thieves coming at night to steal food. Life was hard, and hunger drove people to desperate choices. Still, it was his garden, his hard work, and he could not let someone take it away. He stepped closer, the dry soil crunching under his boots. The figure froze. Then, like a frightened deer, it bolted toward the fence. Samuel's deep voice cut through the night. "Stop right there!" The figure hesitated, tripped on the edge of the row, and fell to the ground. Samuel hurried forward, raising his stick in warning, ready to defend himself if needed. On the ground lay a woman. Her hair was long, dark, and tangled, her dress torn and covered with dust. In her arms she clutched a handful of carrots and a half-broken ear of corn. She looked thin, her face drawn with hunger and exhaustion. Her eyes widened in fear as she stared up at him. Samuel was stunned. He had expected a man, maybe a bandit, but instead it was a young Apache woman. He knew the history between settlers and the Apache people. Stories of raids and violence were whispered in town, and many settlers carried deep suspicion toward them. Yet here she was, trembling before him, not with aggression but with desperation. She dropped the food as if it were burning her hands and raised her palms. Her voice came out broken, soft, and filled with fear. "Please, please don't kill me." Her words carried a heavy accent, but Samuel understood them well enough. Then, in a trembling whisper, she added, "I can serve you if you spare my life." Samuel froze. He had never expected such words. He looked at her, frail, hungry, desperate. She was no enemy soldier, no dangerous raider. She was a starving woman, likely abandoned or lost from her people. His grip on the stick loosened, but his mind was in turmoil. Should he drive her away? Should he call the sheriff and hand her over? Or should he do something else, something his heart whispered was the right thing? The woman slowly crawled back, her body shaking. The moonlight revealed scars on her arms, the marks of someone who had suffered in the wilderness for a long time. Samuel's stern face softened, though he did not lower his guard completely. "Why are you here?" he asked firmly. "Why steal from my garden?" She swallowed hard before answering. "Hungry, no food, many days. Please, I take only little." Her voice cracked and tears shone in her eyes. Samuel's chest tightened. He remembered the harsh winters when he himself had gone without food. Hunger was a cruel master, and he could not forget how it felt. Still, he could not ignore the risk. What if she was not alone? What if others were hiding nearby, waiting for him to show weakness? He glanced around the field, listening for sounds in the distance, but the land was quiet. Only the wind moved through the corn. The woman, seeing his hesitation, pressed her forehead against the ground. "I will work," she said. "I will serve. Just don't hurt me." Samuel sighed, lowering his stick. "Get up," he ordered. She obeyed slowly, her legs weak from hunger. She looked even smaller now, standing under the pale moonlight. Samuel could see the bones in her thin arms and the weariness in her eyes. She could hardly stand, let alone fight. The anger in him dissolved into pity. He pointed toward the small shed near his barn. "You stay there tonight," he said. "Tomorrow I will decide what to do with you." She nodded quickly, whispering, "Thank you." Samuel led her carefully toward the shed, keeping a watchful eye. He gave her a small piece of bread from his kitchen before locking the shed door from the outside. As he walked back to his house, his mind was full of questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? Was she truly alone? And why did fate bring her to his garden this night? Inside the shed, the woman sank to the floor, clutching the bread as if it were treasure. She ate slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks. For the first time in days, she felt warmth in her stomach. She whispered her name softly to herself, as if afraid to forget it. "Nita," she said, her voice barely audible. She closed her eyes, praying silently for safety. Back in his house, Samuel sat by the window, looking out at the barn and the shed beyond it. He could not shake the image of the woman's desperate face. He had every right to turn her in or drive her away. Yet something inside him, something he had not felt in a long time, told him he had done the right thing. Still, the risk was real. If the townsfolk discovered she was here, there would be questions, suspicion, and maybe even anger. He wondered if he was prepared for what might come. For now, he decided he would keep the matter quiet and watch carefully. The night grew colder, but sleep would not come easily to either of them. For Samuel, it was the start of a difficult choice between fear and compassion. For Nita, it was the fragile hope of survival after days of despair. The desert sky stretched above them, the stars shining like silent witnesses. Neither knew what the future would bring, but both sensed that something important had begun in that garden. A story of mercy, trust, and survival that would change their lives forever. The first light of morning spread across the desert, painting the sand and rocks in shades of gold and red. Samuel rose early as always, his body trained by years of farm work. He stepped outside, inhaling the cool air before the sun turned harsh. His eyes moved toward the shed near the barn. For a moment he wondered if the woman might have escaped in the night. Yet when he opened the door, she was still there, sitting quietly on the floor with her knees pulled close to her chest. Her eyes were half closed as though she had barely slept. When she saw him, she quickly lowered her gaze in respect. Waiting for his words, "You're still here," Samuel said, his tone calm but firm. "Yes," she whispered. He studied her carefully in the light of morning. She looked even more fragile now, her thin frame clearly weakened by hunger and hardship. Yet there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. She was not begging this time, only waiting, ready to accept whatever judgment he gave. Samuel thought of his options. He could send her away, but she would likely collapse in the wilderness and die of hunger. He could hand her over to the sheriff, but his conscience resisted the thought of condemning someone who had only stolen a few carrots to survive. Or he could let her stay, though that choice carried risks. The townsfolk might turn against him if they found out. Still, his heart told him that the right choice was not to cast her out. "You will work here," Samuel finally said. "If you wish to eat, you will earn it with your hands." The woman's head lifted, her eyes wide with relief. "Yes," she said quickly, nodding. "I work." "Good," Samuel said. "What is your name?" "Nita," she answered softly. Samuel gave a small nod. "Then, Nita, you will help with chores. You will sleep in the shed for now. You will not go into the house unless I say so. Understand?" "I understand," she said. With that, their arrangement began. Samuel handed her a bucket and pointed toward the well. She walked with unsteady steps, but managed to fill the bucket and bring it back. He watched her closely, testing her strength and honesty. Though her body trembled from weakness, she did not complain. By the time the sun was high, she had carried water, fed the chickens, and cleaned part of the barn. Her movements were clumsy at first, but her determination was clear. Samuel remained cautious. He did not trust her fully, not yet, but he could not deny that her presence made the work lighter. Alone, his chores had always been endless, and his back often ached by the end of the day. With Nita helping, even in small ways, the burden felt less heavy. Later, as they rested, Samuel gave her a small portion of bread and beans. Nita accepted it with both hands, whispering thanks. She ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it were a feast. Samuel noticed how carefully she handled the food, as if she feared it might vanish if she did not respect it. It stirred something in him, memories of his own struggles in younger years when he had known the sting of an empty stomach. Days passed in this manner. Nita remained quiet, speaking only when necessary. She rose early, worked hard, and never once asked for more food than he offered. Samuel began to see her not as a thief but as a survivor. She was skilled in small ways, too. One morning, when one of his goats grew sick, Samuel worried it would die. But Nita knelt beside the animal, examined it carefully, and gathered herbs from the edge of the property. She mixed them into a paste and fed it to the goat. Within days, the animal improved, standing and eating again. Samuel was astonished. "You know medicine," he said. Nita nodded. "My mother taught me. She knew plants. We heal with them." Samuel looked at her with new respect. This was more than a desperate woman. She carried knowledge he did not have, knowledge that could save lives, but not everyone saw her that way. Word spread quickly in small towns, and it was not long before neighbors noticed a strange woman on Samuel's land. One afternoon, as he went to the trading post in town, two men approached him. "Samuel," one said, lowering his voice, "we've seen that Apache woman near your farm. You know it's dangerous to keep one of them around. Folks won't like it." Samuel kept his face calm. "She's just helping with chores. She isn't causing trouble." The man frowned. "Doesn't matter. You know what people say. Can't trust her kind. You'd do better sending her off before there's trouble." Samuel returned home troubled. He understood the fear in people's hearts. The past had left wounds between settlers and the Apache, but he could not bring himself to treat Nita as an enemy. When he looked at her, he saw not danger but a human being struggling to survive. That evening, he sat outside while Nita tended the fire near the barn. The flames flickered against her face, showing the tired lines of someone who had endured far more than her years should allow. Samuel spoke quietly. "The people in town, they don't trust you. They may not trust me for letting you stay." Nita looked down, her hand still working with the firewood. "I know," she said softly. "I am Apache. They fear us, but I only want to live." Samuel studied her. "Do you plan to leave if I send you away?" Nita shook her head slowly. "If I leave, I die. No food, no people, no place." Her words struck him deeply. He could see the truth in them. She had nowhere else to go. Samuel thought of his own loneliness, the long years he had spent working the land with only silence for company. He realized that in her presence, even with the risks, his life no longer felt so empty. The days grew into weeks. Slowly, a fragile bond formed between them. Nita began to hum soft songs in her language while working, melodies that floated gently through the air. Samuel found them soothing, though he did not understand the words. In return, he taught her simple English phrases. She repeated them carefully, her voice hesitant but eager to learn. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Samuel asked, "What do the songs mean?" Nita smiled faintly. "They are songs of the earth. Songs my people sing to give thanks for food, for water, for life." Samuel nodded slowly. He realized she carried not just skills but stories and traditions that reached back generations. Still, not everything was easy. Samuel often caught himself worrying that others might come looking for her, or that one day she might betray his kindness. But each time doubt rose, Nita proved her loyalty with her hard work and quiet gratitude. She never took more than she was given, never spoke harshly, and always worked until her body nearly gave out. Samuel could not ignore the truth. She was no longer just a thief who had crept into his garden. She was part of his farm, part of his days, and though he would not yet admit it aloud, part of his heart had already begun to change. The sky darkened with heavy clouds, an unusual sight in the desert country. Samuel knew storms were rare but dangerous when they came. The air grew thick and the wind carried the smell of rain. He hurried to tie down his tools and check the fences, while Nita rushed to gather the chickens into the coop. The storm arrived quickly, faster than either of them expected. Rain poured from the heavens, drenching the land in minutes. The dry soil could not drink it fast enough, and soon water rushed in streams across the fields. Samuel's heart pounded as he tried to save his crops. Corn stalks bent under the force of the wind, and fences began to crack under the pressure of the water. "Hold this post steady," he shouted as he grabbed one end of a broken fence. Nita ran forward without hesitation, pressing her small frame against the wood, trying to hold it in place. The rain soaked her hair and clothes, but she did not complain. Together, they fought against the storm, moving from one corner of the farm to the next. Hours passed before the storm finally moved on, leaving behind a muddy, broken landscape. Samuel stood, chest heaving, staring at the damage. Large sections of his field were flooded. Some crops were destroyed, fences lay scattered, and tools were washed away. It was a heavy blow. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment despair weighed on him. But then he saw Nita, still standing, her hands scraped and covered in mud, her face weary but determined. She looked at the field and then back at him. "We fix," she said simply, her voice steady. Samuel almost smiled. Her confidence gave him strength. "Yes," he replied. "We fix." Over the following days, they worked side by side to repair what the storm had ruined. Nita showed surprising skill in mending fences, weaving branches and rope with quick, clever hands. She carried heavy buckets of mud to fill holes and gathered stones to strengthen the base of posts. Samuel found himself watching her with growing respect. She was not just surviving. She was fighting to rebuild as if the farm were her own. When night came, both of them collapsed from exhaustion, but there was a quiet sense of victory in their hearts. For the first time, Samuel felt as though they were more than farmer and servant. They were partners facing the harsh land together, yet not everyone saw it that way. Rumors spread faster now. Neighbors passing by noticed Nita working in the field, her dark hair shining in the sun as she bent to plant seeds or carry water. Whispers grew into sharp voices. Some called Samuel reckless. Others accused him of betraying his own people by letting one of them live under his roof, even if it was just a shed. One afternoon, Samuel returned from town with supplies. As he walked past the saloon, two men stepped in his way. Their eyes were cold and their voices sharper than before. "Samuel," one said, "we warned you. That Apache woman has no place here. You're asking for trouble." "She's not causing harm," Samuel replied firmly. "She works hard. She earns her keep." The second man shook his head. "Doesn't matter. People don't want her here. You'd better think about where your loyalty lies." Samuel clenched his jaw, anger rising in him. He wanted to shout that they were wrong, that they knew nothing of her struggle. But he kept his words measured. "I'll handle my farm my way," he said. Then he walked away, leaving their glares behind him. Back at the farm, Nita noticed the storm in his eyes. "They speak against me?" she asked quietly. Samuel hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, they don't trust you. They never will." Nita lowered her gaze. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then she whispered, "I can go. If I stay, you lose friends. People hate you." Samuel looked at her, surprised. "And where would you go?" She shrugged faintly. "Back to the hills. To the wild. I live, or maybe not." The thought pierced him. He could not imagine her wandering the desert alone again, hungry and hopeless. He shook his head. "No, you're not leaving. This farm is safer with two hands working it. I won't throw you away because of gossip." Her eyes filled with quiet gratitude, though she said nothing more. That night, for the first time, Samuel invited her into the house to share a proper meal. They sat at the wooden table, candles flickering softly. The simple stew tasted richer than any feast, not because of the food, but because of the company. Samuel noticed how Nita ate carefully, as though each bite was a gift. When she finished, she softly began to hum one of her songs. Samuel listened, his heart strangely moved. "What does that song mean?" he asked. Nita smiled faintly. "It is a song of thanks. For food, for life, for kindness." The words touched him deeply. He realized then that their bond was no longer just about survival. It was about trust. The days turned into weeks and their routines blended into a rhythm. Samuel taught Nita how to read a few simple words, pointing at objects and writing their names on scraps of paper. She learned quickly, her eyes bright with determination. In return, she taught him how to find wild herbs and showed him how to track small animals in the hills. Each lesson was a step closer to understanding one another's worlds. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Samuel said, "You've helped me more than I expected. This farm, it feels alive again." Nita looked at him quietly, then said, "Before I had nothing. Now I have work, a place. I'm not alone." Samuel nodded. He realized he no longer thought of her as an intruder. She was part of his life now, part of the farm's heartbeat. But the test of their bond was not over. The whispers in town were growing sharper, and soon Samuel knew he would face a choice: stand by Nita fully or give in to the pressure of others. For now, he chose silence, keeping their bond within the borders of his land. Yet inside his heart, Samuel felt something he had not felt in years: hope. Hope that compassion could overcome fear. Hope that trust could rise where suspicion once lived. And hope that maybe, just maybe, two people from different worlds could build something together that neither could have built alone. The sun burned bright over the desert, but Samuel felt a cold weight pressing on his shoulders. For weeks now, he had noticed riders passing near his land more often than usual. Dust rose on the horizon in ways he did not like. One afternoon, as he worked in the field with Nita, the distant thunder of hooves grew louder. Samuel straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, and saw 3 riders approaching. They wore wide hats, long coats, and carried rifles across their backs. Their eyes were sharp, scanning the land as if searching for something. Samuel's chest tightened. He knew the type, bounty hunters. Men who roamed from town to town looking for Apache survivors or outlaws to capture. They didn't care about truth, only about the money they could earn. He glanced at Nita, who froze when she saw them. Her face turned pale and her hands trembled. Samuel whispered quickly, "Go inside the barn. Stay hidden." Without a word, she obeyed, vanishing into the shadows just as the riders came closer. "Afternoon," one of the hunters called, his voice rough. Samuel gave a small nod. "Afternoon." The lead rider leaned forward on his saddle. "We're looking for Apache strays. Word is, some escaped the Army's roundup last season. Heard they've been hiding near these parts." His eyes narrowed. "You seen anything?" Samuel's mind raced. He felt the weight of his choice pressing on him. If he told them the truth, Nita would be taken away, sold, imprisoned, or worse. If he lied, he risked drawing suspicion on himself. He steadied his voice. "I haven't seen anyone. Just me and my land here." The man studied him for a long moment. "That's so strange. Some folks in town say they've spotted someone near your farm." Samuel forced a calm smile. "They must have seen shadows. I work late in my fields sometimes. Maybe that's what they saw." The hunter's eyes lingered, sharp as a hawk's, but eventually he shrugged. "If you see anything, you let us know. There's good money for those who help." With that, he tugged on his reins and the three men rode off, their dust clouds slowly fading into the horizon. Samuel waited until they were far gone before stepping into the barn. Nita crouched behind a stack of hay, her eyes wide with fear. "They look for me," she whispered. "Yes," Samuel said. "But I told them nothing. You're safe for now." Her lips trembled. "You risk much for me." "Why?" Samuel hesitated. He could have answered with many reasons, compassion, fairness, loneliness, but in the end he spoke simply. "Because it's the right thing." From that day on, Samuel kept a sharper watch. He knew the hunters might return. He also knew word about Nita's presence could spread further. Each time he went into town, he felt the weight of people's eyes on him, judging, whispering. But when he came home and saw Nita working in the field, repairing fences or singing softly while cooking simple meals, his doubts faded. She belonged here, more than the rumors or the fears of strangers. One evening, Nita approached him as he sat sharpening a tool by the fire. Her expression was serious. "Samuel," she said softly, "I should leave. If they find me here, you suffer. You lose your land. Maybe worse." Samuel looked up, meeting her eyes. He saw the truth in her words, but also the sorrow. She was ready to sacrifice her safety to protect him. His heart tightened. "If you go, you'll die out there. And I'll lose more than land. I'll lose a good worker, a good friend." Nita's eyes softened. "Friend?" she repeated quietly, as though the word was new and precious. "Yes," Samuel said firmly. "You are not my prisoner, and you are not my burden. You are my friend. This farm is yours as much as mine." For a long moment they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Nita finally nodded. "Then I stay. I work harder. I give all I can." The next morning, Samuel did something bold. As townsfolk gathered near the trading post, he arrived with Nita walking beside him. Conversation stopped and all eyes turned. Murmurs rose, some shocked, others angry. But Samuel kept his head high. "This is Nita," he said calmly. "She works with me. She's part of my farm now." The silence stretched, broken by a few whispers. A woman shook her head, pulling her children close. A man muttered under his breath about Samuel losing his senses. But Samuel did not waver. He bought his supplies, paid in full, and walked out with Nita at his side. Back on the farm, Nita looked at him with awe. "Why do this? Why show me to them?" "Because hiding you only feeds their suspicion," Samuel answered. "If they see you working, living, being human like the rest of us, maybe someday they'll understand." Nita's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Maybe." The days grew longer and their bond deepened. Samuel taught her more English words, laughing softly when she mispronounced them, though always with kindness. Nita in turn taught him songs of her people, songs of courage and of home. Together they repaired the storm-damaged fields, planting new seeds with hope for the future. But the test of loyalty was not over. Late one afternoon, the bounty hunters returned. This time they dismounted and walked straight toward the house. Samuel stepped forward, his face stern. "Still no Apache around here?" The leader asked, his eyes cold. Samuel stood tall. No one here but me and my worker. You've wasted your time. The hunter's gaze flicked past him toward the barn, toward the fields. For a terrifying moment, Samuel feared Nita might be spotted, but she remained inside, silent and hidden. After a long pause, the hunter spat into the dust. Fine, but if we find out you've been lying, you'll regret it. They turned and rode off again, leaving tension heavy in the air. That evening, Nita came out of hiding, her hands shaking. You could have told them. You could be free of danger. Samuel looked at her steadily. I made my choice. You're staying. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of gratitude, of relief. For the first time, she felt not like a fugitive, but like a person who mattered. From that night onward, the farm was no longer just Samuel's. It was theirs. Two lives once divided by fear and circumstance, now bound together by loyalty and trust. The seasons slowly shifted and the land began to heal from the storms. Green shoots rose from the earth and Samuel's farm regained its strength. Yet it was not only the soil that had changed. Life on the farm now carried a new rhythm, one shaped by two sets of hands instead of one. Samuel and Nita worked together from dawn until dusk, their movements steady and in harmony. What once felt like endless labor now seemed lighter, and the silence that had long haunted the farm was replaced by quiet conversations, soft songs, and the comfort of shared company. Nita proved to be more than capable. She knew how to care for the animals in ways Samuel had never tried. When a cow refused to eat, she mixed a drink from herbs that coaxed it back to health. When bugs threatened the vegetables, she created a mixture of leaves and ash to keep them away. Her hands were quick, her mind sharp, and she wasted nothing. Samuel often found himself watching her with admiration, realizing how much stronger the farm had become since she arrived. In time, even the townsfolk began to take notice. At first, they kept their distance, whispering behind Samuel's back whenever he came to buy supplies with Nita at his side. But when sickness spread through the town one summer, and the doctor had no cure for the fever, it was Nita who stepped forward. She prepared a tea from wild plants and offered it to those in need. At first, many refused, suspicious of her. But when one child grew better after drinking it, more people came. One by one, they arrived at Samuel's farm, asking for Nita's help. Samuel stood quietly as Nita worked. She moved with calm and patience, never asking for payment, only wanting to help. Her reputation began to shift. The same people who once muttered against her now spoke in hushed gratitude. The Apache woman saved my child, one mother said. She's not like what we thought. The words spread, softening some of the hard lines of prejudice. Not all hearts changed, but enough to ease the tension that had long pressed on Samuel. Through it all, Samuel watched with quiet pride. He remembered the first night he had found Nita in his garden, weak and trembling, begging for her life. Now he saw her standing tall, her eyes steady, her hands bringing healing instead of fear. She was no longer just a woman struggling to survive. She was part of the land, part of the community, part of his life. One evening, as the sun set in colors of red and gold, Samuel and Nita sat on the porch, resting after a long day. The air was warm, carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers. Samuel leaned back, his hat tilted low, while Nita hummed one of her songs. The melody floated softly, weaving through the quiet of the night. Samuel listened, then asked, "What does this one mean?" Nita smiled faintly. "It is a song of new beginnings. My people sing it when a journey ends and a new one starts." Samuel looked at her thoughtfully. "Seems fitting," he said. "Your journey brought you here. Mine brought me to this farm. Now maybe we've started something new together." Nita lowered her gaze, her smile gentle but full of meaning. "Yes," she whispered. Together. Days turned into weeks and their partnership deepened. They shared meals at the same table, planned the farm's work side by side, and leaned on each other when the days grew hard. Trust, once fragile, had become strong as iron. Samuel no longer thought of Nita as a guest or even as a helper. She was part of his world, as important to the farm as the soil itself. One day, while repairing the fence, Samuel paused to wipe sweat from his brow. He looked at the wide stretch of land before him, the rows of crops, the animals grazing, the house standing tall, and realized how different everything felt. For years, this farm had been only his, a place of solitude and silence, but now it carried laughter, songs, and shared labor. It carried life. Nita joined him, carrying a basket of vegetables she had just picked. She set it down and glanced at the horizon. "This land is strong," she said softly. It gives when you give to it, Samuel nodded. And it's stronger now because of you. Her eyes met his, and for a long moment they simply stood in the quiet, the bond between them deeper than words. The turning point for the community came that autumn. A small group of travelers passing through town fell ill with fever, and once again, the townsfolk turned to Nita. Samuel drove her into town with his wagon, and she worked tirelessly, preparing remedies and caring for the sick. The townspeople watched in silence, their old prejudices struggling against the undeniable truth of her kindness. By the time the travelers recovered, even the sheriff, who had long distrusted Samuel's decision, nodded with respect. She's done more good here than most, he admitted. Nita's place in the town remained unusual but no longer unwelcome. People still spoke cautiously, but they no longer dared accuse Samuel of betrayal. Instead, they came quietly for help, their voices humble. Nita never turned anyone away. That winter, as the first frost dusted the fields, Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He remembered the night he had caught Nita stealing from his garden, her voice trembling as she begged for her life. He thought of the storms they had endured, the hunters they had faced, the whispers they had defied. Through it all, they had built something no one could take away. Sitting by the fire one night, Samuel spoke softly. "Do you ever think about leaving? About finding your people again?" Nita stared into the flames, her eyes distant. "My people are gone. I have no tribe, no family left. But here I have work. I have purpose. And I am not alone." Samuel nodded slowly. Her words filled him with quiet peace. She was right. They had formed their own kind of family, not bound by blood, but by choice and by trust. As spring returned, the farm bloomed brighter than ever. The crops grew tall and healthy, the animals thrived, and the land seemed alive with new energy. Samuel often thought back to that first night in the garden and marveled at how a single act of mercy had changed everything. The story of Nita and Samuel spread slowly, carried by neighbors and travelers. It became a tale of hope, of how two people from different worlds could find strength in each other. For Samuel, it was a reminder that compassion could build bridges stronger than fear. For Nita, it was proof that even after loss and despair, a new beginning was possible. One evening, as they stood side by side watching the sun dip below the horizon, Samuel said, "Do you ever wonder why it happened? Why you came to my garden that night?" Nita looked at him, her eyes calm. "Maybe it was the earth's way. Maybe it was meant to be. You had food, I had nothing. You had loneliness, I had fear. Together we found life." Samuel smiled faintly, the lines on his face softening. Yes, together we found life. The desert stretched before them, wide and endless, but they no longer faced it alone. Where once there had been suspicion and hunger, there was now trust, work, and hope. The farm, once a place of silence, had become a home built on the simple power of mercy and resilience. And so, the hungry Apache woman who had once whispered, "I can serve you if you spare my life," stood no longer as a beggar, but as a partner, a healer, and a symbol of what could be created when fear gave way to kindness.